Good afternoon and welcome to the Florida Small Cities Community Development Block Grant Program Application Webinar. My name is Sharita Jackson and I am the Deputy Bureau Chief of the Bureau of Small Cities and Rural Communities. Joining me today is Graham Markarian, Lead Supervisor for the CDBG program, and Blake Rockwood, who is also a supervisor within the program. I want to thank you for taking out the time of your busy schedules today to attend this informational webinar. This will provide you and your staff with an overview of the Small City CDBG program application cycle and will also provide guidance regarding application development and submission. I hope the webinar is informative and helpful in your efforts to develop an application that results in positive community and economic development impacts in your community. At this time, we will turn the camera off and begin the presentation. Today, we will go over completing and submitting the application form, the Small City CDBG program information, funding categories, applicant eligibility, national objectives, and eligible activities. Also, potential application rejection issues, citizen participation, fair housing requirements, defining service areas, and surveying beneficiaries. Finally, we'll go through procurement of professional services, readiness to proceed requirements, and economic development. After the formal presentation, we will answer questions. Please feel free to enter your questions in the chat feature as we go. Please note this webinar is recorded and the slides will be available on the CDBG website within 2 business days. The CDBG application cycle will open on September 2nd, 2024, and will close October 17th, 2024 at 5 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. For electronic submissions, please email a request to submit it electronically to cdbg@commerce.fl.gov no later than October 11th, 2024. Florida Commerce will reply with instructions for uploading application documents. For mailed applications, use the address on the slide. Mailed, shipped, or electronic applications must be received by 5 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time on October 17, 2024. When completing the CDBG application, there are several resources available to the applicant. The CDBG application resources include the Florida Commerce website listed on this slide, the FFY 2023 eligible communities list, application form downloads and instructions, census data links, Section 8 income limits, and sample public notices. The application for funding is comprised of 9 separate parts. Please submit only those parts relevant to your application for funding. All applicants must submit a copy of the cover sheet. Neighborhood revitalization applicants must also submit parts 2, 7, 8, and 9. Housing rehabilitation applicants must submit parts 2, 6, 8, and 9. Commercial revitalization applicants must submit parts 2, 4, 8, and 9. Please submit only the relevant appendices from part 9. If leverage is being claimed for points, part 3 must also be submitted. Applicants do not need to send a copy of the application to the state clearinghouse. After an applicant is notified that their application is being funded, they are to submit portions of the CDBG application to the clearinghouse for review. The CDBG federal grant program is administered by the Florida Commerce Small Cities Community Development Block Grant Program, which provides funding for housing and community development activities. The CDBG program is governed by the federal and state regulations listed on this slide. There are 4 funding categories in the CDBG program. The categories are commercial revitalization, economic development, housing rehabilitation, and neighborhood revitalization. Commercial revitalization includes construction, infrastructure, in support of commercial enterprises, including facade improvements, fire hydrants, water and sewer improvements, streets and sidewalks, relocation of utilities to underground, open space parks and playgrounds, and the clearance and demolition of vacant or dilapidated buildings. Economic development includes building construction, demolition of vacant and dilapidated buildings, water and sewer improvements, fire protection, flood and drainage, relocation of utilities to underground, rehabilitation of commercial buildings, and loans to nonprofit entities. Housing rehabilitation includes clearance and code enforcement, demolition, historic preservation of residential housing, housing rehabilitation or demolition, and replacement of low to moderate income owner occupied or rental occupied residential housing units. Finally, neighborhood revitalization includes fire protection, flood and drainage activities, hazard mitigation activities, construction of or improvements to parks and playgrounds, recreation and neighborhood centers, senior centers, water and sewer improvements, sidewalks, street improvement, and health facilities. Eligible applicants include counties with a population in an unincorporated area less than 200,000 and any city, town, or village with a population less than 50,000. Also, eligible applicants can have no special entitlement status and have not opted to join an entitlement program. An entitlement community is a county whose population is 200,000 or more, or a city of 50,000 or more. Such local governments receive their funding allocation directly from HUD on an annual basis. Ineligible applicants include entitlement communities, small communities that opt to participate in an entitlement program, and communities with an open housing rehabilitation, neighborhood revitalization, or commercial revitalization agreement. Please visit www.floridajobs.org/CDBG applicant info for a list of eligible community applicants. Per Section 290.046 Florida statute, a local government that has an open housing rehabilitation, neighborhood revitalization, or commercial revitalization CDBG grant agreement is not eligible to apply for a new award under any of the 3 aforementioned funding categories. However, such a local government may apply for an award under the economic development funding category. If activities funded through their open housing rehabilitation, neighborhood revitalization, or commercial revitalization CDBG grant agreement are on schedule with the approved CDBG work plan. A local government with an open economic development CDBG grant agreement may apply for an award under the housing rehabilitation, neighborhood revitalization, or commercial revitalization funding categories if the CDBG economic development is on schedule with its current approved work plan. The funding ceilings reflected on this slide are based on Rule 73C-23.0041, Part 2, Florida Administrative Code. The minimum award for a housing rehabilitation, neighborhood revitalization, or commercial revitalization application for funding is $600,000, and the maximum is $750,000. Applicants for funding under the Economic Development Funding category may apply for up to $1.5 million on the basis that the participating party or job creator will complete at least one new full-time equivalent job of the $34,999 of CDBG funds awarded. That at least 51% of all jobs created must be available to a person from a low to moderate income household. CDBG funded activities must meet at least one of the three HUD national objectives. The low to moderate income national objective requires that at least 51% of the beneficiaries receiving indirect benefit, such as from road paving, must be low to moderate income persons. For direct benefit activities, such as housing rehabilitation funded activities, 100% of all beneficiaries must be low to moderate income. Activities funded under the Slum and Blight National Objective may be funded under the Commercial Revitalization Funding category only. Activities funded under the Urgent Need National Objective must address urgent community needs that pose a serious and immediate threat to the health and welfare of the community for which other funding is not available. Eligible infrastructure improvement activities include water and sewer, street and sidewalk paving, flood and drainage, parking lots, natural gas lines and rail spurs, and fire protection. Eligible public facilities construction and improvement activities may include, but are not limited to, community centers, temporary shelters, and park playgrounds. Direct benefit activities include housing rehabilitation, temporary relocation assistance, and water and sewer hookups. Planning-only grants include water, sewer, and/or master utility studies, as well as a capital improvements program. CDBG may be used for studies, analyses, gathering data, and identification of actions that will implement plans. Final plans must include options and/or alternatives. For example, option A is a full project implementation. Option B is a phased implementation. Option C is critical need only. And option D is a no action alternative. Planning and capacity building activities do not include engineering, architecture design costs related to a specific project. For example, detailed bid specifications and working drawings, and other costs of implementing plans. Infrastructure planning only grants or activities must comply with the requirements or the low to moderate income national objective. Planning only grants or activities can meet low to moderate income national objective if it can be shown that at least 51% of the persons who would benefit from implementation of the plan are low to moderate income persons. Ineligible activities include general government expenses, buildings for the general conduct of government, political activities, purchase of equipment with exceptions for economic development projects, fire protection, operating and maintenance expenses, new housing with exceptions, and income payments, excluding emergency grants. List of eligible communities, special designation, census data, and scoring data are located on the Florida Commerce website found at www.floridajobs.org/CDBG applicant info. A list of eligible activities is included in the application form located on the Florida Commerce website. The HUD Guide to National Objectives and Eligible Activities is available at www.hudexchange.info and also on the CDBG website. Section 290.047 Florida statute governs the rejection of applications for funding. The 7 circumstances which will result in the rejection of an application for funding include submitting the application after the deadline, the project does not meet the national objective, the project is not an eligible activity, the application is not consistent with the local government's comprehensive plan, the applicant has an open CDBG project, the applicant is not in compliance with the citizen participation requirements, or the information provided in the application that affects eligibility or scoring is found to have been misrepresented. Other potential rejection issues regarding surveying and service area boundaries include random sample survey problems, the service area being improperly drawn, or homes missing from the survey. At this time, Blake Rockwood will continue with citizen participation requirements.
24 CFR 570.486 stipulates that all applicants for funding shall provide for and encourage citizen participation, including low to moderate income citizens that reside in slum or blighted areas and areas in which the CDBG funds will be applied. Applicants must ensure that citizens are given reasonable and timely access to local meetings, information, and records relating to the proposed and actual use of CDBG funding. Local government applicants must furnish citizens with public notice and information which includes but is not limited to the federal fiscal year under which an application will be submitted, including the grant and anticipated program income. Such notice should include the range of activities that may be undertaken, the amount of CDBG funds that are proposed to be used for each activity, and must specify which national objective the activity or activities will qualify under. The notice must state whether the proposed CDBG activities will likely result in displacement and provide reference to the applicant's local government's anti-displacement and relocation plan. Public notices conveying the aforementioned information must be advertised in a newspaper of general circulation in the applicant's jurisdiction. In addition, applicants are encouraged to convey public notice using social media, the applicant's local government website, public service announcements, and posters posted in areas frequented by the general public that may be impacted by the proposed activities. The notices should convey enough information so that citizens who may be impacted by the proposed activities will be advised of the likely impact on their lives. The public hearings must be publicly noticed in accordance with the requirements of Rule 73C-23.0031, Part 27, Florida Administrative Code, and be conducted by a member of the applicant's governing body or a duly authorized representative. Local governments are encouraged to offer virtual attendance in addition to attendance in person. Virtual conference call public hearings must provide reasonable notification and access for citizens, timely responses from local officials to all questions or issues, public access to all questions and responses, take appropriate actions to encourage the participation of all residents, and roll call for attendance should be taken at the beginning of the event. If a member of the public declines to identify him or herself, that is not to be considered an issue of concern. Allowing public participation through virtual or conference call participation in the public hearings, in addition to in-person attendance, promotes accessibility and provides a convenient opportunity for citizen participation. It is highly recommended that the applicant's official government website and social media accounts be used to promote attendance as well. It is critical that local government applicants understand the purpose of the first and second public hearings. During the first public hearing, attendees should be provided with general information regarding the availability of funding, through the Florida Small City CDBG program and the types of activities that are allowable and could be undertaken. After that process has occurred, citizens should be invited to speak and offer their views regarding community development needs. The agenda for the first public hearing and the activities undertaken therein must be limited to the bulleted items reflected on this slide. The local government should not take any steps to limit citizen participation or input in the public hearing process. The second public hearing is intended to inform the public of the draft applications for funding and the proposed CDBG funded activities. The notice must present a brief summary of the draft application, including the federal fiscal year of funding for which the application is being considered, a description of the activities that are proposed to be undertaken, a budget that lists the specific dollar amounts that would be allocated to each proposed CDBG activity. For example, $56,000 for administration, $84,000 for engineering, $880,000 for street improvements and repaving, and $380,000 for water treatment plant improvements. Summary must also include the HUD national objective that will be met by each activity, excluding funds budgeted for administration and engineering. Lastly, the location, including street names or road numbers of the proposed CDBG funded activities for proposed neighborhood and commercial revitalization and economic development projects must be included. The second public hearing notice also must include information such as links to a website or email address where a copy of the draft application can be obtained and reviewed prior to the date of the public hearing. Information describing where the written comments may be submitted and the deadline for the submission, the date, time, and location of the hearing. If the hearing may be attended virtually or via conference call, information sufficient to facilitate that process must be included in the notice. During the second public hearing, the proposed application is discussed, including the planned activities, the specific location of those activities, and the specific budget amounts for those activities. Citizens must be allowed to comment on the proposed application, and their comments must be documented. The applicant should give consideration to all public comments and modify the application prior to submission if they determine that it is appropriate to do so. Documentation related to both the first and public hearings is required. Such documentation must include proof of publication and a copy of publication from a local newspaper. A copy of the speaker cards or sign-in sheet and/or call log documenting those persons in attendance must be provided, and certified copies of the minutes from both public meetings must be provided. If certified minutes are not available at the time the application is submitted, please include a copy of the draft minutes. Meeting minutes should not be on local government letterhead. As noted on this slide, the requirements to utilize a citizen advisory task force is no longer mandatory. However, if an applicant has an appointed and utilized a CATF consistent with program requirements, the application can qualify for up to 10 additional points than an application that did not do so. A CATF must have at least 5 members, of which at least 3 must be considered low to moderate income. For scoring purposes, a CATF must have a quorum of at least 51% of the appointed members presented at the meeting in order to qualify for points. Only 1 member of the CATF may be an employee of the local government applicant. Elected officials may not serve on the CATF. More than 1 CATF meeting may be held. If the CATF meeting is conducted prior to the first public hearing, the application will receive 10 points. If it meets after the first public hearing but prior to the second public hearing, the application will receive 5 points. CATF meetings must be properly noticed in newspaper. Be sure to include meeting minutes, sign-in, and/or roll call sheets, and documentation of the public notice in the application. Citizens know their needs. Advice and participation is essential to the success of the CDBG program. Therefore, the CATF meeting should not be dominated by local government staff. The purpose of the CATF meeting is to receive input from the CATF members and to facilitate discussion regarding their perception of their community's needs. Past CDBG applications should not be discussed until after the CATF members have discussed what they see as the community's needs. Failure to meet the fundamental citizen participation requirements reflected on the previous slides is considered threshold and will result in rejection of an application as required per section 290.0475, part 6, Florida statutes. Applicants may score up to 10 points for outstanding performance in fair housing if they have adopted a fair housing ordinance prior to the application cycle deadline. An additional 5 points may be claimed if the applicant has conducted a fair housing workshop within 12 months of the application deadline. At this time, Graham Markarian will continue with defining service areas.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Graham Markarian. Just for anyone who's joined since we initially started the presentations being recorded. I'm going to go ahead with a discussion of this slide. So this slide provides an overview of the process to define a service area and survey beneficiaries. The first step is to identify the beneficiaries of the proposed activity. The second is to determine the boundaries of the service area. The third is to plot the beneficiaries and proposed activities on a service area map. And then you'll need to develop a project narrative and use either census data or conduct a survey to demonstrate compliance with the national objective. Funded activities that provide benefit on an area basis are described as having indirect benefit and require a defined service area. Work performed on public property or to construct an easement is generally defined as providing indirect benefit, whereas an activity like hookups is considered to have a direct benefit and are allowed relative to indirect benefit activities, such as construction of new sewer or water lines. Service area boundaries are determined based on the beneficiaries of the CDBG construction activity. The work location for an activity does not necessarily relate directly to the beneficiaries. For example, if the CDBG funded activity were a sewer lift station, which serves dozens of housing units, those housing units may or may not be located near the lift station. Therefore, it's important to take time to consider who the beneficiaries are and to properly define your service area. At least 51% of all beneficiaries of the CDBG funded construction activity must be low to moderate income persons. When developing the service area, it's important to identify the location of the activity on a map using legend indicators. The legend indicators are helpful when determining the beneficiaries for indirect benefit activities such as street work and sewer and water line improvements. The beneficiaries must also be identified on a map. The service area boundary can then be developed and drawn on that map. It's important to remember that multiple activities may require multiple service areas whenever the beneficiaries are not identical for all funded activities. Please also note that each service area must benefit at least 51% low to moderate income persons. The service area map is a visual representation of activities, locations, and beneficiaries, and the map must be consistent with the beneficiaries identified in your survey. An improperly drawn map may affect eligibility for funding if not all project beneficiaries were included, or if some beneficiaries were not correctly identified. Such errors may result in a survey being invalidated and the application for funding being rejected for non-compliance with HUD guidelines. The application narrative serves as a textual description of the proposed project and will be compared to the service area map, which will serve as a visual representation. The narrative description and the map must be consistent with one another. And an activity that is not properly represented in the narrative or on the map is not considered to be a part of the proposed project. The service area map will govern the CDBG project if the narrative description is not consistent with the visual representation on the map. Generally speaking, all neighborhood revitalization and commercial revitalization activities must be located within a service area. The service area for a commercial revitalization project is normally the entire jurisdiction of a local government applicant. Under certain circumstances, you may be able to justify a smaller service area for a commercial project. and applicants for funding under the commercial revitalization category who believe that their proposed project may not necessarily benefit the entire jurisdiction should contact their assigned small city CDBG regional representative to request technical assistance prior to developing an application. The service area boundaries for housing rehabilitation applications are the corporate limits of the applicant local government. Since housing rehabilitation activities provide direct benefit, all beneficiaries must be low to moderate income persons. Okay, let's talk about surveys. So surveys are conducted to establish the benefit to low to moderate income persons within a service area and helps to confirm the benefit to low to moderate income persons is at least 51% or more of the population in that service area. Surveys are also conducted to confirm the number of beneficiaries and their income characteristics for the purpose of scoring and ranking applications and reporting accomplishments to HUD. It's important to note that you must income qualify residents on an area basis, and pursuant to most recent HUD guidance, veterans' disability benefits are generally not considered income for CDBG purposes. There are 4 accepted methods of survey. Those include the use of census data, using a previously approved survey, conducting a new small area survey, or conducting a new random sample survey. It's important to note that use of a survey previously approved by Florida Commerce may not be allowable unless it complies with the requirements of HUD Notice CPD-19-02. If you plan to use a previously approved survey to qualify an application, you should contact your assigned small city CDBG regional representative to request technical assistance prior to submission. Applicants may use the HUD American Community Survey 2020 update only if the data in the service area corresponds exactly to the corresponding block group, tracts, or the jurisdictional boundary. The 2020 update of HUD's ACS LMI survey data can be accessed online using the link on this slide. And as a reminder, slides will be made available after the presentation. The graphic on this slide demonstrates how a census tract can be used to reduce the size of a survey that would have to be conducted otherwise. In this example, the GIS data for Census Tract 003 can easily be downloaded and combined with the survey data to verify compliance with HUD's national objective requirements. Allowable survey methods include the use of mailouts, telephone interviews, web-based surveys, and any other method that complies with federal, state, and local government guidance or regulations. A small area survey must be conducted when the service area has less than 50 homes and must include a survey of 100% of the homes in that service area. Any homes that cannot be surveyed must be counted as over income, and the population of any homes that could not be surveyed should be determined by calculating the average household size of all homes that were surveyed within the service area. Random sample surveys must be conducted consistent with the requirements outlined in 2 HUD notices. That's HUD Notice CPD-14-013 and CPD-24-04. A confidence interval of 95% is recommended, and a confidence interval lower than 90% is not allowed. For reference, a confidence interval has an inverse relationship with your margin of error. So using a confidence interval of 95% allows for a 5% margin of error. Applicants must use the confidence interval for the equivalent geography contained in the HUD 2020 low to moderate income census update. So if the census provides that the equivalent geographic area has a margin of error of 10% in their survey, the margin of error cannot exceed 10% for the random sample survey that's conducted. To conduct a random sample survey, applicants must identify the total number of homes in the service area and apply a non-repeating number to each home. The applicant must then randomize the number sequence and survey homes based on the order presented in the random number sequence. The primary sample group is the first group of homes that equal the minimum sample size needed. For homes that are surveyed, applicants must document at least 3 attempts to survey each home that was included in the primary sample group. In instances where a housing unit included in the primary group was not accessible after 3 attempts, the applicant may use an alternate by by selecting the next house, which resulted in the generated list of non-repeating random numbers just outside of the primary sample. If the required minimum sample size is not achieved using this aforementioned procedure, it's allowable to either begin the survey again, or alternatively, if the applicant does not want to reconduct the survey, they may consider a non-responsive home as over-income. This slide provides various online resources that may be accessed to facilitate the survey process and is compliant with program requirements. So this slide has a sample calculator to determine the minimum number of necessary samples and can be found on the website noted on this slide. And on this slide, we have random.org, which will provide a random sequence generator that produces a non-repeating list of random numbers equal to the total number of residential housing units located within a service area. This slide depicts an example of a randomly generated non-repeating list. A copy of this list must be submitted with your application in order for us to determine that the survey was conducted in compliance with program requirements for conducting a survey. Applicants should use Form SC49, the Household Income Certification Form, or an equivalent form when conducting a survey. The form has two sides to it, and both sides must be completed and signed by the interviewer. Once you've completed your survey, the random sample survey results must be summarized, showing the total beneficiaries, as well as the total moderate income, low income, and very low income beneficiaries. It's recommended that applicants use an Excel spreadsheet or similar software to summarize the data. The survey data must be used to calculate the percentage of low and moderate income benefits for each service area. The confidence interval must be subtracted. The margin of error must be subtracted from the LMI percentage developed through the survey to verify that the resulting LMI percentage is still 51%. If the adjusted LMI percentage is less than 51%, the service area does not qualify under HUD's LMI national objective. If the adjusted percentage equals 51% or more, it does qualify. However, the applicant should use the unadjusted LMI and VLI, very low income, percentages for scoring purposes. So this slide provides us two examples. In example one, the survey results exceed 51% after reducing for the corresponding confidence interval. In example two, the survey results are less than 51% after deducting the confidence interval. Therefore, that activity is not eligible for funding. As many as 3 different maps are required to submit an application for funding. Neighborhood revitalization, commercial revitalization, and economic development applications must include jurisdiction, service area or project area maps, and floodplain maps. The legends representing housing units on service area maps must be color-coded to depict economic status. In this case, over income, moderate income, low income, or very low income. All proposed CDBG funded activities must be represented on the service or project area map using color-coded legend indicators. Housing rehabilitation applications require 2 maps, a jurisdictional map and floodplain maps. In addition, neighborhood and commercial revitalization applications must include a description of how the boundaries of the service area were determined, as well as the survey methodology that was used. A copy of the randomly generated non-repeating list of homes used for the survey must also be included in the application. Random sample survey problems include when the primary sample was not randomly selected, when alternate houses were not randomly selected, or when beneficiaries were left out or wrongfully included in the service area. An example of this would be when an application requests funds for upgrades to a city water treatment plant. In this case, city limits are shown as the service area border. However, not all city residents are connected to the city water system, and some homes located outside the city limits may be served by the water system. In this case, the city should include all homes that are actually serviced by the city's water treatment plant, not necessarily what's limited to the city's geographic basis. If homes are missing or omitted, we may not be able to determine that the project will meet a national objective, which may result in the rejection of the application. Now, Blake Rockwood is going to take us through the procurement of professional services.
Thank you, Graham. If CDBG funds are used to pay the costs of professional services, the procurement process must comply with the federal code, state statutes, and sections of the Florida Administrative Code referenced on this slide. If the applicant is not using CDBG funds to pay for professional services, compliance is not required, and Florida Commerce does not review the procurement. A separate procurement is needed for each service on each CDBG subgrant. For example, application preparation, project administration, and engineering design and construction inspection services are considered separate procurements. Please note that HUD issued a ruling that if inspection services were not listed in the request for proposals for engineering services procured before submitting the application to get readiness to proceed points, then the inspection services must be procured by a new RFP. Florida Commerce cannot approve a design firm for inspection services unless inspection services were listed in the RFP. Per 2 CFR 200.320, there are 5 basic types of procurements, including micro purchases, small purchases, competitive bids, competitive negotiation, and non-competitive. The local government staff should take the time to read and become familiar with their CDBG procurement policy to ensure compliance with program requirements. The request for proposals must be advertised in a nearby MSA, or at least 3 responsible and responsive proposals must be received. The request for proposals can now be published on the county website, where each local government is geographically located, so long as the website is accessible to individuals with disabilities and provides meaningful access for individuals with limited English proficiency. The request for proposals must be published at least 12 days prior to the bid close date, not including the date of advertisement. The RFP must include the evaluation criteria, and a separate evaluation and ranking must be undertaken for separate services. Advertisements shall include a CDBG identifier such as the funding cycle or CDBG contract number. Section 287.055 Florida Statutes, otherwise known as the Consultants Competitive Negotiation Act, governs the procurement of professional services such as engineers and architects. The statute applies to design build contracts and construction manager contracts, but not contracts for administrative support services. Per Section 287.055 Florida Statutes, covered consultant proposals must be evaluated and ranked based on qualifications. It is unallowable to solicit price information prior to beginning negotiations for such. If the local government cannot reach an agreement on a mutually agreeable fee for services, that firm must be rejected and initiate negotiations with the next highest ranked applicant. They cannot return to a firm after ending negotiations and moving on to the next highest ranked firm. If the local government reaches an agreement regarding the cost of services, a detailed cost analysis must be conducted. A detailed cost analysis is one that breaks out direct costs such as the cost of salaries and benefits, as well as indirect costs and the cost of additional engineering services. The detailed cost analysis must list profit as a separate line item. Profit may not be loaded into the negotiated rate to be paid for salaries and benefits. The local government must employ procedures that encourage competition. Procurements that employ procedures that undermine competition will be rejected by Florida Commerce. Florida Commerce will review the public notice to ensure compliance with federal code, state statutes, and administrative code. The evaluation criteria must have been available to all proposers either by including them in the advertisement or embedded in the RFP. Florida Commerce recommends that local governments provide training to the evaluators before they review and score proposals. Evaluators must use the published evaluation criteria, which may not be altered after advertisement. If Florida Commerce identifies any issue related to the procurement, they must be resolved before Florida Commerce can approve the procurement. Remember, evaluation factors must be relevant to the work to be performed, and they must be measurable. Price must be a factor when soliciting proposals for administrative services, but not for engineering or architectural services. The ranking procedure used by local governments must be applied consistently for all proposals being reviewed. Local governments should give consideration to whether or not the procedure being used may be subject to manipulation and take appropriate action if needed. Florida Commerce will review documentation submitted in support of a procurement to confirm that elected officials did not change rankings or unduly influence the evaluation committee. It is allowable for an elected official to serve on an evaluation committee. An evaluation committee can be used to shortlist or identify the top 3 to 5 proposals. The CDBG procurement policy must be followed in such instances. Remember that ranking establishes the order of consideration for professional services covered by the Consultants Competitive Negotiation Act. If negotiations do not result in an agreement with the top-ranked firm, that firm must be rejected and the next highest-ranked firm selected for negotiations. If, during its review, Florida Commerce determines that the procurement did not comply with federal code, state statutes, or administrative rule, the local government will be advised of possible corrective action that may be taken, or the local government may be elected to use leveraged funds to pay for the service. A price or cost analysis must be conducted with each procurement. A price analysis is done if price was an evaluation factor. A price analysis gives consideration to other prices for comparison. For instance, the lowest price bid by respondents to an RFP for administrative services would receive the highest score for price. The other proposers would receive a lower score for price. In all instances where no prices were obtained or where there was only a single respondent, a cost analysis must be performed. A cost analysis must include labor hours and cost, indirect costs, expenses, and profit, and a cost analysis must be performed by someone qualified to do so. Local government employees, officers, or agents, members of their immediate families, their partners, or people about to be employed by a proposer may not participate in the procurement process at any level. It is not possible to waive a conflict of interest. The only thing that can be done is to disclose the conflict and step aside. If a conflict of interest is discovered after the fact, Florida Commerce will disallow all costs incurred to the date relative to the conflict. And at this time, I will bring it to Sharita.
Okay. In order to qualify for readiness to proceed points, the application must contain the following: a letter from an engineer or architect who prepared the construction plans and specifications. The letter should be addressed to the chief elected official of the local government, certifying that the signed, sealed, and dated plans and specifications are complete, and that the bid documentation, including plans and specifications provided with the application, contains all of the required information needed to advertise for bids, with the exception of the Davis-Bacon wage decision. The letter should also contain the CDBG supplemental terms and conditions and the local government's list of certified minority and women-owned business enterprises. The letter must also certify that all permits required to initiate construction have been submitted to the required agencies, or that the only required permitting agency is the applicant's local government. If no permits are required for the project, the letter must certify to that effect. The application must also contain a signed and sealed copy of the plans and specifications, plus all necessary bid documents, with the exception of the Davis-Bacon wage decision, the local government's list of certified minority and women-owned business enterprises, and the CDBG supplemental terms and conditions, which must be added prior to advertising for bids. The application must include receipts from the United States Postal Service or other delivery service sufficient to confirm that all required infrastructure permit applications were prior to the submission of the application to Florida Commerce. An email or letter from the permitting agency or agencies confirming that the application was received is also considered acceptable documentation for purposes of scoring readiness to proceed points. Some deficiencies in readiness to proceed submissions may be cured if documentation is provided prior to the end of the completeness period that verifies the plans and specifications were completed and all permits were applied for prior to the application deadline. If not verified during the completeness period, points claimed for readiness to proceed will be disallowed. Here, this slide represents sample language to be used to certify for readiness to proceed points. This slide provides a further example of the requisite certifications required for readiness to proceed. Here you will find an excerpt from a sample letter which represents an example of an engineer's certification regarding permits where only one permit is required. Next, this slide offers an example of a certification where the permits have already been received. This slide offers an example certification that appears to be contradicted by the Florida Department of Environmental Protection, which implies that more permits may be required. If that turns out to be the case, readiness to proceed points may be disallowed and the application's ability to score high enough to receive an award may be affected. Finally, this slide offers an example of a certification where the permits will be issued by the applicant's local government. And at this time, Graham Mercurian will discuss economic development and its requirements.
Eligible activities in the economic development category include the construction of public infrastructure in support of a business. Public infrastructure is a broad term and may include the paving of streets, the installation of sewer lines, or relocation of utilities. However, construction under the economic development category can be done to the minimum public improvements needed to create or retain full-time equivalent jobs. Each economic development application for funding must comply with HUD's public benefit standards and satisfy the low to moderate income jobs national objective. This national objective requires that one full-time equivalent position be created or retained for every $35,000 in CDBG funding provided. At least 51% of all jobs created or retained must be made available to persons identified as low to moderate income. Some reminders for economic development applications include that applications received during the application cycle are competitive and are ranked or prioritized for funding based on their application score. If the total of all economic development applications received during the application period do not exceed the total amount of funding that Florida Commerce has reserved for economic development activities, the remaining funds may be made available for reservation on a first come, first served basis after the close of the application cycle. Applicants for economic development funding must demonstrate that the proposed project location is properly zoned at the time the application is submitted. In accordance with section 290.0475, subsection 4 Florida statutes, Florida Commerce's review of the economic development application includes confirming zoning to ensure that the proposed use of the project location is consistent with the local government's comprehensive plan. An award of funds for economic development activity is not allowable if no job creator has committed to the project, and a job creator must be identified in the application as what's called a participating party. The project location must be located in a non-entitlement community, and an underwriting analysis is required for startups. The application narrative includes such information as the roles of all parties whose action or participation are necessary for the project's success. It must clearly state the number and types of jobs to be created or retained. The narrative must also include a description of any additional development, spin-off jobs, and the need for additional goods and services which are likely to be stimulated as a result of the project. The narrative must clearly describe the proposed activities to be funded through the CDBG program, as well as any non-CDBG funded activities that will be funded by the participating party and/or from any other source of funds. The project narrative must also describe any anticipated increase to the tax base that may be likely to occur, including property sales, and other taxes. It's important to remember that jobs retained for low to moderate income persons are jobs that generally require only a high school education. If jobs will require additional training, the narrative must clearly describe the anticipated training needs for low to moderate income persons and how and who will provide that training. Finally, the narrative must demonstrate that the cost per job created or retained will not exceed $35,000 in CDBG funding per job. Supporting documentation that must be included in the application includes a local government letter of commitment as described in Part 5 of the Economic Development Application Instructions, an engineer's project cost estimate and certification of the minimum infrastructure requirements. If multiple jurisdictional activity is expected, such as a cooperation between a city and county government, interlocal agreements must be submitted with the application. Additionally, documentation stating the applicant has committed, if the applicant has committed leverage funds, documentation submitting that should be provided, as well as a comprehensive plan, conformance, and relevant excerpts. And lastly, jurisdictional project area and floodplain map should be provided. On this slide, you'll see copies and examples of the three maps that were just discussed on the prior slide. Again, that's a jurisdictional map, a project area map, and a floodplain map, which should be included with the application for funding. The application must incorporate supporting documentation provided by the participating party or job creator. It must also include a letter of commitment, including all elements listed in Part 5 of the Economic Development Instructions sections of the application. Documentation of site control for the project and financials for the 2 previous years, including a balance sheet and income statement, should be provided. Additional documentation includes a detailed cost estimate of the participating party's private investment activities relative to the proposed project. The participating party must also submit a business plan in outline format, which includes a description of their planned business, its marketing plan, a description of any competitors, a management plan for the proposed business operations, a schedule for the undertaking of construction of any related facilities, and an assessment of any risks involved in the planning of these business operations. An applicant for funding under the Economic Development Program category can lose their funding reservation if all required documentation is not submitted in accordance with the application instructions, or if that is not available at the time of the site visit in accordance with Florida Commerce's site visit notice and requirements. The funding reservation can also be lost if the applicant local government fails to provide requested documentation and executed copies of the CDBG subgrant and participating party agreement within 60 days after those things are offered. Awards made under the Economic Development Program category are subject to financial consequences. If certain national objectives are not met, including the failure to create or retain the minimum number of jobs committed to in the application, again, of which 51% must be offered to low to moderate income persons, the applicant may be required to return funds to Florida Commerce on ratio of $34,999 per job that is not created or retained. At this time, I'm going to pass our presentation back to Sharika.
This concludes our presentation today. If you have any questions at this time, we ask that you please type them in the chat feature. We realize there are some questions already in the feature, so we're going to take a minute to allow you to submit any additional questions, and we'll review all questions that were submitted during the presentation. So we'll be back to answer your questions in just a moment. Okay, thank you again for the questions that we received in the chat. Most of them, we'll start with the ones that everybody's kind of asking, and that's about the presentation. The presentation will be available on the website, our webpage, within about 2 business days. So feel free at that time to check back and you'll have access to that entire presentation. Regarding, I think the first other question we had was from, it was regarding corporate boundary. And we're basically, it's relating to a county, so we're talking about the unincorporated areas of that particular boundary is what we mean when we say that. Okay, and I think the last question we received was, can you apply for housing rehabilitation and economic development funding at the same time? Yes, you are eligible, to apply for both at the same time. And at this time, there are no additional questions. We want to thank you. Okay. We want to thank you for participating in the CDBG application webinar. If you have any further questions or if you'd like to discuss specific project ideas or questions, you may contact us using the information listed on the slide.